Let's take a moment to appreciate the extra blue I've got today, including these blue earrings. Hi, welcome back. Sarah from Tangy Tarot here. So, inspired by the past two videos I just did about tarot and oracle decks I've decluttered over the past 2-3 years, I was inspired to do another video just compiling the list of reasons why I've decluttered those decks to have, a listicle of sorts of reasons why I should anti-haul these kinds of decks in the future. This is basically going to be a list of reasons to not buy a deck, a list of reasons to anti-haul a deck or most decks. I'm not 100% sure what the title of this video is going to be, but it's going to be something along those lines. I don't have any hashtag in mind for this video, but I do welcome any and all VRs for what kinds of reasons you might have for why you might not want to buy any more decks at this time. Or what reasons do you have for being picky about what decks you want to buy at this time? And in case this needs to be said, I'm not trying to throw shade at anyone for buying decks. Heck, I bought a lot of decks over the past 3 years. I've also decluttered a lot of decks from buying decks that I honestly didn't need or didn't use long term. So my intention with this video is to provide a space for me to reflect on the reasons why I should not buy decks in the future so impulsively, as well as just to promote intentional and mindful purchasing and consuming. I'm at the point now where I want to be a lot more mindful of the things that I purchase because, like I mentioned in the past couple videos, buying things just to sell them again is such a hassle. It is such a hassle to have to put together posts and pictures of decks that I'm trying to sell and go through the hassle of like selling them to people and making sure that it gets to the right place and making sure that it gets priced accordingly. Like, it's so much of a hassle. So I want to just promote mindful purchasing as much as I can. So if you need to hear this message, I hope that this list of reasons can help you out as well. So here's the reasons why I'm going to anti-haul a deck. So the first type of deck I won't buy again is a modern deck that has specific scenes or associations with each card. Now, for example, I bought the Cosmic Cycles a year or two ago, and one of the cards features a Two of Swords, which features a young kid being torn between two parents that are having an argument. In my mind, the first thing it jumps to is a child of divorced parents. And I mentioned in this last video that when I see that Two of Swords in a reading, I'm not going to think about crossroads and indecision. My mind is going to be stuck on that association of the child being stuck between divorcing parents. I feel like I fall into this trap a lot when it comes to modern decks. On the one hand, I think that modern decks can be really great for beginners because it can show like the energy of the card through an experience or a situation in modern day that is very apparent and very easy to like look at and read about. On the other hand, for me, I like my decks to be a little bit more abstract because otherwise I get too bogged down in that specific scene. Like, I'll just keep thinking about like, oh, the divorcing parents or the arguing parents instead of what the overall Two of Swords metaphorically means. So I won't buy modern decks with specific scenes or associations anymore because I like my decks to be a little bit more open-ended and just more metaphorical instead of just specific scenes. The next type of deck I won't purchase again is any deck that highlights or features animals as the main focus. And like I mentioned in my past videos about decluttering decks, I just find that I like animals, but I don't like them or connect with them enough to be able to read with them in a tarot reading. I think a lot of decks like to feature animals as like their symbolic meanings, but I get tripped up in the symbolic meanings of animals because I didn't grow up with like a lot of connection to animals. I didn't really grow up watching documentaries of animals or things like that. Or I'm not really a part of any cultures or traditions that honor animals and work closely with animals. So I just don't really have any emotional connection with animals. So for example, in the Tarot Fauna, the Justice card features a panther. So if I draw the Justice card in a reading and I see this panther, I'm not going to really understand what the panther means, why it was chosen for this card, and how this panther relates to the concept of justice and the reading that I'm doing. I did make a video recently showing the animal decks that I actually like. Decks where the animals are actually doing stuff, like they're dancing, or they're holding the wands, or they're like doing things that show the essence, the energy of the card. The Affirmators Tarot is one that comes to mind, for example. But yeah, besides that, I just can't do decks that only feature animals as the symbolism or like that is just what the card is. I just don't really connect with decks like that, whether tarot or oracle. Animals are cool. I just can't really string together a coherent message with them in a reading. Another deck I won't buy again is a seasonal deck. This includes decks that have tempted me such as Halloween decks, Christmas themed decks, even Valentine's Day decks or like love relationship type decks. I definitely thought that I would be into the Halloween spirit, which is why I bought the Halloween tarot some time back. And I thought I would really use decks more for Christmas as well, which is why I bought a Christmas themed deck. But as I found now, I just don't use those decks. Even during Halloween or Christmas this past year or years, I just did not use those decks as much as I thought I would. I did try to pull them out and I really tried to get into the vibe, but I just don't get into the Halloween spirit or the Christmas spirit enough to warrant buying tarot decks that I think I will use for those seasons. And I think this extends to just all holidays. I don't celebrate that many Western holidays, just being Asian American and not really being connected to those things. I do celebrate Christmas time just as the spirit of Christmas, and also because it's hard to escape the commercialization of Christmas and the musicality of Christmas during December. But also, like, I think even when it comes to Asian holidays, like, I like Lunar New Year, but I don't think I would get a tarot deck based on Lunar New Year either, just because I fall in the same trap of like, I wouldn't really use with it. And also the idea of having a deck only to use for like that 1 month or few weeks of the year just doesn't really appeal to me. Even though I can use that deck throughout the whole year, I feel like I wouldn't really be in the mood to use it until like that specific holiday. And then again, even that specific holiday, if I don't feel like using it, then when else would I ever use the deck? So seasonal decks or holiday themed decks, just not for me. Me at me, don't buy those again. The next type of deck I won't buy again is a deck that is very aesthetically pretty, but I probably cannot actually do readings with it. And I have an unfortunate example for me today. It is the Weaver Tarot. If you watched the past couple videos, you'll know that I bought one edition of this like a year or two ago secondhand, and then I rehomed it. I sold it like a year or two after because I was like done studying it. I didn't know how to read with it. And then guess what? This clown decides to buy the deck again. Granted, it is another edition. The past edition I had was like a mid-toned pink edition. This edition is the shadow edition. Ooh, very dark, very mysterious. But I bought it because they were having a cyber sale in November, and also the artists were saying that they were going to stop printing these decks. So I was like, I should get this deck in case it goes out of print and I can't have it again. So I have it. How many times have I done readings with it? 0. Since November. 0. It's been 7 months now, and I have not done any readings with this. So to show you a few cards as examples, this deck is the epitome, is my example, of a deck that is very aesthetically pretty to look at and to play around with, but to actually read with, I don't know how to read with this. I don't know when I'll ever read with this. I don't know how or what circumstance will call me to read with this. I know the light is like shining very brightly, but this is the best we can do right now. So I'm just gonna, wow, pretty, wow, it's shiny, right? I did sell the last version of this that I had. This version I'm going to keep around because I think it is nice to have some decks that are pretty and maybe not that functional in my collection. But I will let this deck be the only deck in my collection to have this purpose of being pretty and not very functional for me. So this deck is going to be a reminder that I will not buy this type of deck again, and I'm going to just keep this deck around to make sure I don't make the same mistake again. So, example of a deck that is aesthetically pretty, but I don't know how or when I'm ever going to read with this. The next type of deck I won't buy is a deck from the same artist, only if I feel obligated to collect all the decks. So to break this down, let's say this artist here, if I have one deck from them, if I kind of like another deck from the same artist, I might feel obligated to be like, maybe I want the other deck as well, so I can start collecting the whole set from the same artist. And they all look so cohesive together. I would do so many readings with like that pair of decks. Stop. Don't do that. Get some help, go back, do not pass go, whatever. Reason being, if the only reason why I want to get the deck is to support the artist or to collect all the decks, but not actually to use them, I probably don't really need that deck. And I mention this because I have a lot of decks. I have at least 50 tarot decks that I really want to work through. I just need to make sure that I would actually use the deck and enjoy it on its own rather than it being a part of a set that I would only use in a set or only because I want to collect all the decks from this artist. I also have the Prisma Visions, Light Visions, and the Cosmo Visions Tarot and Oracle decks from James R. Eads, and I'm running into the same problem where I'm not super connecting with one or a few of the decks, but I'm very hesitant to actually let them go or sell them because I'm very hesitant to break up the collection. But truly, objectively, practically speaking, if I am not using the decks on their own, regardless of whether they're a part of the set or part of the same artist, I should not be getting that deck. I should not be holding on to it if it's not useful for me. So yeah, if I have a deck from an artist, I should not feel obligated to buy another deck from that artist just because it's the same artist. I gotta make sure that I would actually use it and enjoy it on its own first. So this list so far has been very specific things that I will look for or not look for in decks. Now we're going to move on to some more expansive or kind of abstract reasons. So the next type of deck that I will not buy is a deck that is new on the market, a new release that has not had many critical reviews or enough time out on the market for me to determine if people have used it for long term or done thorough in-depth reviews doing multiple types of readings with this deck. To clarify what that means, I used to be up to date on a lot of Kickstarters and new releases from publishers. Now, 3 years in, I'm ready to slow down a lot more. My big purchasing phase is pretty much over. Now, instead of trying to look for decks that I can mass purchase or like just bring in a lot at once, I really want to take time and think about what decks do I want to keep long term. Because like I've mentioned, I hate the feeling of buying a deck only to try to sell it again, like just a month later or like within like the next 6 months because I just didn't think it through. There's been a few decks that I have purchased because other people were raving about them, but they haven't been in use or in circulation long enough for me to determine if I might actually use this long term. The Cosmic Cycles Tarot, for example, was one that was very hyped up when it was like being released. And then there was radio silence on it for a while as decks were taking a long time to be fulfilled. And then when I finally got it, I just didn't even care to use it anymore. So, and that deck was $60. Like, what an expensive lesson, you know, a $60 lesson to learn to not give into the hype. And with new releases, it's just very easy to buy into the hype, to buy into the anticipation. And then once the anticipation period is over, once that deck is actually in our hands, it can feel very easy to be like, all right, well, that's done. What's the next thing to look forward to? Like, didn't we just spend 3 to 6 months anticipating the release of this deck? How are we so quick to move on to the next deck already? I don't want a part of that cycle anymore. This cycle of anticipating and then as soon as I have it, I'm already moving the goalpost to anticipate the next thing. Like, I just want to appreciate the things that I have, and I want to make each waiting period worth it for the decks that I choose to bring in. So if a deck just came out like now or tomorrow, I'd want to wait at least 3 to 6 months, even a year, to see if people are going to put this deck on their top 10 list, their top 5 list of the year. Yeah, just things like that. I just want to see if the deck is usable and likable enough for people to like it long term instead of decks that are just trendy and then people are on hopping to the next trend and I want to follow the next trend. The next type of deck that I won't buy is a deck where I find myself thinking, oh, this is going to be perfect for this type of work. And what I mean by this type of work, it could be inner child work, shadow work, deity work, relationship readings, things like that. Basically any deck where I think I'm going to use it for a specific purpose. This kind of lines up with what I said earlier about how I won't buy seasonal decks anymore. The same energy kind of applies here. For example, with Halloween, if I'm not into Halloween spirit, like Halloween costumes or events or movies or vibes or decoration, I feel like I'm probably not going to get into Halloween tarot decks for that same reason. So same with like deity work. If I'm not really into deities in my regular life outside of tarot and outside of witchiness, if I don't really watch like deity movies or themed media or read books about deities or like talk about it with my friends, I'm probably not going to do deity work, and I'm probably not going to need tarot decks that are geared towards only doing deity work. If or when I get to the point that I actually want to do deity work, I want to make sure that I'm doing it in the rest of my life. I'm integrating it into my life. For example, journaling, looking at prompts, reading about them, watching movies again, just integrating those things into my life, and then I can probably buy a tarot deck to support that practice of doing deity work. But the practice has to expand beyond the tarot deck. So I can't just get a tarot deck thinking that the tarot deck is going to make me want to do deity work, because like I found in the past, like buying a tarot deck alone is not enough to make me actually do the work or be interested in the thing that that deck is associated with. And similar thing for like shadow work or inner child work. I think some people will say, what is a good deck for shadow work or for inner child work? But what I find effective about inner child work or shadow work is that I try to integrate these prompts and practices into my life outside of tarot decks. And I also would want to break down what exactly does that look like for me, because what looks like shadow work for some people is not the same as shadow work for me. So if I want to do shadow work, what exactly would it look like? For me, I know that I would want to be more in control of my emotions or just be able to acknowledge and sit with my emotions. That's one big aspect of shadow work for me. So I would want to look for a deck that is more emotional awareness based, but I would want to make sure that I'm doing the shadow work like practice, like separately on my own, like maybe I'm journaling about it or maybe I'm reading up on it and then buying the deck afterward. I don't want the deck to be the first thing that like makes me think I'm going to do it. Basically, what I'm trying to say is I want to have a practice kind of semi-established or an intention for it before I think I'm going to buy a deck for it. It's all just a matter of being aware of what my fantasy self thinks I'm going to do versus what I'm actually doing. Another example of this would be daily draws. Someone else might think this deck is perfect for drawing a card before bed every night. For me, I have to consider, would I actually draw a card before bed every night, or is that something that I probably wouldn't do? If I probably wouldn't do it, I don't need to get that deck that this other person uses for that purpose. Basically, I need to be mindful and discern what my fantasy self thinks I'm going to do versus what my real self is actually doing. The next type of deck I won't get again is a deck that I will need to study to read with. This is kind of related to the reason I was just talking about with my fantasy self. Sure, sometimes I have fantasies or daydreams of me poring over books and studying an encyclopedia of a certain topic and having the right deck to really study and read the guidebook and just go card by card and really get to know the deck. My real self does not do any of that stuff. My real self likes to look at cards. Occasionally I might read the guidebook, but really that's the extent of my tarot studying. One example of a deck that I needed to study before knowing was the Zillich Tarot in a Tin, which was a Thoth style tarot. So I had a deck for a long time because I thought one of these days I'm going to finally learn Thoth and I'm going to know how to read this deck. I never got around to it. I finally did read about the court cards, which were the main thing tripping me up, and I could not understand the Thoth court cards at all, so I sold or gifted that deck. Thoth decks, not my style. I'm not going to ever study with them. I know this about myself now. Another type of deck that I would be pressured to study would be a deck that features stories or mythology. The Tarot of the Divine is an example of this. Basically, that deck, every card has a specific story or a myth associated with it. When I had the deck, I just felt pressured or obligated to study each story before I could even read with it. And that's just not something that I really like to do in my practice. I don't really want to study decks that have a lot of lore or story or like details in the cards to study. There's just an upper ceiling or an upper limit of how many details I can enjoy and handle in a card or a deck before I decide it's like too much. So for me, decks that I feel like I have to study a lot before I can feel comfortable reading with them, just not my vibe. Not for me. The next type of deck I won't buy is a deck that is over $60 new. Now, I mention new because I am committed to buying secondhand as much as I can now. If a deck is like a lot over $60 new, but someone's selling it for under $60 or at $60, I might consider buying it. But the truth is, I have spent a lot of money on tarot decks now, and even though it's all been at a pace that I am comfortable with, it has been sustainable, I also think over $60 is a lot of money to spend on a deck. I have spent like $75 on a certain few decks, and I honestly don't think they're more precious or more special than the other decks that I've had that were under $60. $60 is just really like my limit for how much I want to spend on a single deck. I think $40 to $55 is like probably a comfortable range that I'm comfortable spending on one deck. But yeah, just a new deck that is over $60, I'm just not really going to buy it. I'm probably going to look for it secondhand, but even so, I'm probably just going to write it off and not even put it on my wish list, because again, that's really pricey for a deck for me. I don't want to spend that much on decks anymore, and I have a lot of decks that I'm trying to work through now and enjoy now. The next type of deck I won't get, on the flip side, is a deck that is under $20 new. And I have a similar logic with this one. The rationale with decks that are under $20 typically is, oh, let me just throw this in my cart because I'm already buying other things, or let me just pick it up on my way out the store because it's really cute and it's only $20. The thing is, if the price is the only reason why I want to buy a deck, I probably shouldn't buy a deck. I should want to buy a deck because I want to use it, because I'm inspired by it, because it actually would bring me joy, not because it's cheap and I can afford it. That should not be the only reason why I want to buy something. I want to make sure that the decks that I buy, whether it's $20 or whether it's $60 or whether it's in between, I want to make sure that these are decks that I'm going to use and enjoy long term, regardless of the price. And the other thing with decks that are under $20 is that a lot of people probably fall into this same trap where they just buy the deck because it's so cheap and then they decide they don't really like it long term. And I've seen this a lot with the secondhand market with the buy-sell groups on Facebook. The Light Sears Tarot, for example, is like under $25, and that one gets sold secondhand a lot. The Moonology Oracle, which I purchased and then I also sold, like that one is also on the buy-sell markets a lot. So I feel like a lot of these decks that are under $20, people probably are selling them for $20 or less secondhand. So if I want to buy a deck at $20 new or $20 secondhand, I'm going to choose to try to buy it secondhand because at least I'm getting it off someone else's hands and they can get rid of it and whatever. So no more buying decks $20 or less that are new for me. Secondhand, please. The last type of deck I won't buy is a deck that I've already purchased and let go of once. And like we've seen with the Weaver Tarot, I should not have bought this deck again because I've already gotten it once and I let go of it because it wasn't working for me. I bought it again and clearly it's still not working for me enough that I would want to read with it. So if I want to buy a deck again, I really want to make sure that I have an intention, a game plan for how things will be different this time. But honestly, I just don't feel like I'm going to change drastically that I would enjoy that deck again. For example, I've had a couple of inner child decks that I've sold or gifted to other people because I'm just not really into inner child work. So if I were to buy those inner child decks again, I would want to make sure that my practice, my tarot practice, my self-growth or whatever is different from how it is now or before when I sold the deck before. I'd want to make sure that I'm actually using inner child concepts or prompts or whatever in a way that actually works for me. And then I can get the deck again, and then I have a better intention on how I'm going to work with it. I have a game plan this time. Until I have a game plan for how I'm going to reuse that deck, I'm not going to buy a deck that I've already purchased and let go of once. Let's just move forward and not focus on regretting the past. And bonus, the last type of deck that I won't buy is a deck for someone else without asking them first. The giver in me, the lover in me, wants to shower my friends with love and good things and wonderful things, and my impulse is to want to buy anything that I can afford and gift it to them. Like, just buy anything, whatever you want. Do you like it? I'll buy it for you right now. But that can be really overwhelming for someone. Just because someone likes something doesn't mean that they want to own it, doesn't mean that they want to be gifted it right away. Like, maybe they like something, but they want to simmer on it for a little bit before they want to buy it themselves. Maybe instead of being gifted it, they do want to buy it themselves and feel proud that they chose it and selected it themselves. I have been gifted a couple of decks which weren't super my vibe, and I do feel bad that the decks don't click for me as much as the recipient hopes they did. And even though my friends do understand that like a gift is just a gift and ultimately it's up to me what I want to do with it, I want to make sure that I'm not putting that burden or my impulse purchase burden on someone else. I would definitely want to make sure I check in with someone, what kind of interests they have, what kind of decks they might like. Are they actually looking for a tarot deck right now? And would they want to buy it themselves and work towards that themselves? Or would they be okay with me gifting one to them? And like, I know that there are people who would be happy to get a gift. And I know that like a lot of people enjoy receiving gifts. But I'm just saying that I want to be mindful that I'm also considering my friend in the gift that I want to get them instead of just buying them something just because I feel like buying it to them and I'm not considering their feelings. So those were the reasons why I'm not going to buy a deck. And some last thoughts. Any reason that you have to not want to buy something is a valid reason. No is a complete sentence. Don't let anybody pressure you or make you feel obligated like you have to buy anything. For me, not buying has been a lot easier this year because I'm really committed to this Tarot and Practice series where I use a deck for multiple readings, I try to find different uses for a deck, and I try to put them all into a video so that I can feel very satisfied that I've used the deck to its fullest potential so far. Another inspiration and factor helping me not buy as much now is I'm very committed to buying decks secondhand. I think that it's very sustainable to help buy decks secondhand because it helps take a deck off someone's hands. It stops them from, throwing it in the trash. They get some money back and you get to have a deck at a lower price. So I think buying decks secondhand is such a great thing for everybody. Buying decks secondhand also helps me to wait a little bit longer. For example, if I have something on the wish list, instead of trying to buy it new from the artist's website, I will try to wait and see if anyone is trying to sell it secondhand. And so it just helps me practice waiting and have some delayed gratification as I wait for the deck to be available and I can bring it in secondhand. And as I'm waiting for that deck to pop up on those buy-sell groups, I am still working with the decks that I have and still enjoying and appreciating the things that I have already. And the last thing I'll say is it is just so easy to be influenced by the content that we consume and the mediums around us. I remember in like some polls or whatever on YouTube and maybe Facebook, some people have dozens of decks, even hundreds of decks, whereas in the Sass Witches Discord server that I'm in, which is granted a witchy server for all witchy folks, not just for tarot people, the most common response I've seen on that group is that people have less than 10 decks. So without a doubt, I know that my time on YouTube looking at other videos of people showing off these decks and talking about these decks and reviewing these decks, it has helped me buy a lot of decks that I maybe would not have known or bought if I wasn't on YouTube. I am grateful to be on YouTube and I am happy that I have these decks and I am happy that I've curated my collection to the point that I really do enjoy a lot of the decks that I do have. But I just want to put it out there. I think it's important that we be mindful of the ways that we're subtly or maybe overtly being influenced and to make sure that we are buying things and doing things because we genuinely want to and because it genuinely fits with what we're doing and what we enjoy. Not because we're trying to be like someone else or we're trying to be in the in crowd or we're trying to subtly hope that someone else will like us if we buy this deck. Hi, so I have some last thoughts, some extra last thoughts before I close out this video. First, it's that I recognize that sometimes I want to buy a deck because I just want to support the artist, but I realize now that I can totally support an artist monetarily or otherwise without actually buying a deck and buying an item to keep in my home with me. And I run into this similar issue with other types of art like earrings and prints and just other types of art. Like when I go to artist markets, I have to really hold on to my wallet and my credit card because it's really tempting for me to just buy like anything that any artist is selling on the basis that I'm supporting an artist. But truly, I just need to make sure that I can afford whatever I'm spending money on, and also that whatever I'm spending money on is going to kind of work for me in the long term. I'm not just buying things and having this plethora of items in my home just to say that I've supported artists. I can choose to back the deck on Kickstarter by pledging without a reward. So I choose a tier that says pledge without a reward. I can just toss in any amount of bucks I want instead of pledging for the tier that gets me an actual physical reward from the creator. I can also see if the artist has any Patreon or any Ko-fi or any other sort of service where I can send money to them, or even just engaging with them on social media. That way I don't have to actually have the physical item in my home forever and ever. And the other thing I wanted to say is that truly there's no shame or no shade if you've done any of these things, whether it has been a mistake for you, like it has been kind of for me, or whether these have been purchases and things that have actually worked out for you. Like, if it works for you, great for you. Like, don't let me tell you what does and doesn't work for you, I'm definitely a big supporter and proponent of doing what makes you happy. I'm also a proponent of trying to be mindful of if our sources of happiness are sustainable in the long term and if they're actually healthy and helpful for us rather than dragging us into unhelpful patterns that may not be working out for us in the long term. For me, it was buying decks and then going through the purging cycle. Like, that just did not work for me. That's not healthy or helpful for me anymore. So that's something I want to be more mindful of. My intention for this video overall is for this to just be some self-reflection on my part on what decks I bought and why I bought them, and what cycles and habits do I end up finding myself in when it comes to buying and reselling decks. So, it's just self-reflection on my part so I don't make these same mistakes again. And surprisingly, I can already think of some reasons for a part 2 of this video. So whenever I get around to that, a part 2 will be coming soon. So that is a list of reasons why I won't buy a deck. Like I mentioned at the beginning, I don't have a dedicated hashtag for this, but if you have any VRs or thoughts of your own on what makes you not want to buy a deck, I would love to hear it. So let's be more mindful together moving forward of if we're lusting after a new shiny thing because we genuinely like that new shiny thing and it would actually help us and fit in with what we're currently doing, or if we're only lusting after it because it's new and shiny and we're a sucker for new and shiny things. That's all I got for you today. Thanks for watching. Bye!